Nomad, welcome to the Gauntlet. Are you ready? Are you prepared to face the trials?
I am as ready as I'll ever be, I think. That's what I'd
Indeed.
say there.
There's
Great to
really
be
no
here on
preparing
Langston for
for
this
such an
year.
ordeal.
Yeah.
Round one. Do you want to talk about music, economics, or cosmology?
Well, let's be honest, I'm going to have to stick to my relative strengths, shall we say. So I will start with economics.
I thought you might. Okay. Progressive taxation reduces inequality. Free markets inherently lead to unacceptable levels of inequality. Or carbon pricing is the most efficient way to combat climate change. And remember, you can argue for or against any of these.
um, right, okay. Give me a moment. So, progressive taxation reduces inequality. Free markets inherently lead to unacceptable levels. Um, Free markets inherently lead to unacceptable levels of inequality. I guess this is all about, well, the first two anyway, about the nature of inequality. So,
Hmm.
yeah, I will go, I think I'll go with free markets inherently lead to unacceptable levels of. Um, okay, I'll go with number two. Uh, we'll go with number two. Free markets inherently lead to unacceptable levels of inequality, and we'll see which way we go with that.
We
Because
end up, yeah.
if we zoom out, this could get quite layered, quite nuanced, quite quickly, if I might say so. But yeah. So, free markets inherently lead to unacceptable levels of inequality. I think free markets invariably are going to lead to some degree of inequality. In terms of unacceptable, I think that's a bit problematic in a way. Depends what we mean by unacceptable, doesn't it? Um,
Yes, I should say, feel free to define your terms yourself, as it were, and then make the argument based on your own terms. But in terms of points, if you make your own job too easy, then you won't get as many points.
Aha, I see. Sting in the tail. Okay,
Yeah.
well, yeah, I think free markets are going to lead to eventually they will become problematic if you bring them to their logical sort of um, conclusion, really. I suppose it's what we mean by things like, well, a free market. Well, if we mean sort of, deregulation, a completely free kind of economic landscape. I'm talking about the free movement of goods, capital, people, but also ideas. Yeah, these will produce inequalities. They will produce disparities, just sort of naturally, really. I mean, I think we've seen that with um, the slow deindustrialization of many Western countries, haven't we, Luke? I think we've even mentioned that a couple of times on our streams last year. When you have, if labor is just cheaper in other parts of the world, in a free market in a free market setting, you're going to see jobs and industries move to China, to Mexico, to Indonesia, to parts of the world that are just cheaper to sort of produce, especially produce manufactured goods and whatnot. Um, Now, is that desirable? I'm not entirely sure if it is really. I mean, the industrial wage was the backbone of many communities. To be honest with you, I think that's certainly the case in the UK. I actually yesterday I was just looking at some data on the slow and steady deindustrialization of the United Kingdom in preparation for some work, some projects I've got going on, and it is a straight sort of linear, downward sloping uh, line. But I think that is inevitable. Really, that is the reality of free market ideology. There's not really, once the wheels are set in motion, there's not much you can do. I would argue that it probably does lead to unacceptable um, levels of inequality, to be honest with you. So I think it's hard to argue against it. Really, it's hard to say. It's hard to
So
say otherwise.
in the picture you're painting, you're talking about a global free market, free movement of goods and people and capital between countries. So you get the deindustrialization of the UK because there is an industrialization of the developing world, right? If you looked at the total system, the UK in general would be a concentration of wealth. So are you talking about an inequality globally? Or because you were talking about the fact that industrial jobs within the UK disappear. So are you talking about the inequality within the UK that the people who used to have a steady wage from working in a factory now, like, they have to enter the knowledge economy, which they may not be
Yeah,
built for, right? So
sure.
which of these problems are you, or is it something different, some other sort of inequality?
Yeah, this is a very interesting point. I mean, a lot of academics, a lot of writers have made that very point, actually. If you look locally within the UK, you'd say what you've just mentioned, that lots of smaller localities and regions have struggled and they're worse off. But the bigger picture is globally, things are better globally. Yeah, there are fewer people living in abject poverty, relative or not, and more of the wealth of created by free markets is kind of more evenly spread across the world. It's a difficult one to say. I mean, if you look at the two most populous countries in the world that have been in my lifetime, China on the one hand, India on the other, material conditions have improved a lot in both of those countries. I think China's functioning middle class is 700 to 800 million. I think India is about 300 to 400. Sorry, those are rough estimates. So, the problem is that has obviously come at the expense of a lot of jobs, a lot of industries, and a lot of prosperity leaving the developed world, what we consider the developed world. Now, is there a happy medium between the two? It's hard, it's difficult to find that. And I think, if you leave market forces to their natural kind of, to their being, they're invariably going to go where labor, production, manufacturing is cheaper. And I think that's kind of unavoidable, to be honest. We've seen that progressively, especially in the last, I'd say, 3 to 4 decades. But you could say it's a slow and steady process, really, since World War II. I mean, it just is. When you look at a lot of these industrial towns, Luke, in the UK, up and down the country, it is very sad, because the industrial wage provided a foundation for families, communities, and entire towns up and down the country, really. And there's a lot of you can look at that decline, and it's once that industry goes, it's difficult to get back. And as you were saying, there are problems with the knowledge economy, with technology. I mean, older people are just going to find it harder to break into it, and it's not for everyone. It's a problem. It's irreconcilable. I mean, one thing about the globalized system we have, I'd say, Luke, is that everyone likes cheaper prices and they like consumer choice. Very few people, irrespective of their politics, their ideology, their background, dislike these things. But I think we just have to say that there is a consequence to this. I mean, yes, you get all the cheap consumer goods, you get lots of choice, and so on and so forth. You can be happy consumers, but the invisible. I would conclude. I don't want to go off on too much of a tangent. We've got more are they questions or are they propositions to come. But
Yes,
what
we've
I
got
would,
six rounds. So,
yeah.
but I'll give you slightly more time on economics, since it is, after all,
Well,
your
the
specialty.
invisible hand of the market does not guarantee fair and equal outcomes, unfortunately, and that's the reality, especially in its globalized form. So, and under a free trade model, you find that goods are cheaper, maybe consumer goods are cheaper, but the long term effects of this model are highly damaging. And you could say it's not cheap at all because it destroys uh, communities, it destroys industries, and it will eventually end up rebounding on the nation's economy. Because when you hollow out those local industry, that leads to increased poverty, unemployment, welfare dependency. Then you see all kinds of decline, social decline as well. Crime increases, and you sort of start this self-reinforcing feedback loop, don't you? And we see this all over the Western world. We particularly see it in the UK, but it's very difficult because everybody likes cheap goods, and they like consumer choice. But I think sustaining this in perpetuity is a problem that we haven't really solved. So yeah, good start.
Why is I want to dig into the
Sure.
unacceptable levels of inequality part, because I think you've sketched out the dynamics of the free market quite nicely, but why is inequality a problem? For example, if you have somebody whose effective income is the same, why does it matter to them whether or not there are other people in the same country who have a lot more? If all other things being equal, why does inequality matter?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, apples for apples. In a way, it doesn't, or it shouldn't, because there will always be inequality. To be honest, it doesn't matter what system you have. There will always be some degree, some amount of inequality. It's like crime. It's like pollution. These things are always
The
going to
poor will
be.
always be with you, as Jesus said.
Exactly. I think the problem is I think this is actually quite a complex question, just as difficult as the opening proposition that we started this exchange with. But I think it's difficult because under the system we have, what has happened is that monetary inflation is out of control, asset prices have gone soaring, and this has really exacerbated the inequalities between people, communities, even countries, you might argue. When we had local industries and everything was, well, we consumed what we produced, so to speak. I'm thinking, just after the war, maybe pre-war or whatever, it was okay having inequalities because they were scalable, if you know what I mean. Okay, yes, you're always going to have, those in the city, the bankers, the industrialists who are going to be at
The
one end of
bankers, the
the economic,
bonuses.
the pyramid, and then you've got the workers who are at the bottom. But now there is no sense of scale, and the problem is when you have um, all this, spiraling asset prices, monetary inflation, and on the ground level, you have rising inflation and the cost of living crisis. Well, again, um, that sort of exacerbates the inequalities we already have. And then, well, how are you going to provide? This is the problem, isn't it? How are you? What do you do with those people who are at the thin end of the scale, who are at the bottom of the
But again,
pyramid? It's
are we talking
difficult.
about because you could argue that the free market led to the people at the bottom having an improved standard of living,
Yeah.
even if they have relatively less than the mean, for example.
Hmm.
But like again, why is that a bad thing? If you had, isn't there an argument that the rising tide raises all ships?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think a lot of what you can see or observe, a lot of it does come down to personal choice, and a lot of people probably aren't making very good choices when it comes to either their health, um, their conditions, their finances, whatever, and so on and so forth. There's lots of causal factors. There's lots of push and pull factors at work here, but it's not. It's definitely not an easy one to sort of. Sorry, could you restate that last question,
Yeah,
Luke?
so I think um you're analyzing the factors that lead to inequality, but I'm more asking, is inequality bad?
I think if it's manageable, if you can absorb it without it leading to. The problem is inequality leads to other problems, doesn't it? It leads to the broader breakdown of society, whether it's addiction, crime, uh, whatever, people relying on welfare, dependent on public services. All of it's the results of the inequality that are really the
Yeah,
bad
how
thing. I
come?
mean,
What
it's
what do you think? What do you think it is that means that inequality leads to crime and welfare dependence and social breakdown?
yeah, that's definitely a big one. I think again, it's a very complex ecosystem of influencing, push and pull uh, factors at work here. I did an article this month, Reflection 6. I was looking at these YouTubers, Luke, who go around the UK just with a GoPro or a camera. They just document everything on the ground level. And, increasingly, we're finding more and more towns and even actual cities just fall into disrepair. Everything is declining. Everything, the infrastructure, the environment, the economy, the people. The people reflect back at them the decline you can see around them. You can see with your eyes. It's this very, strange kind of concept, but it's also very sort of very worrying. I mean, I don't think the problem is it isn't manageable. Going back to what I was saying a couple minutes ago, it's okay if people have enough, but they don't. When asset prices go up, interest rates go up. The guy at the sweet shop is no longer spending £700 a month on rent. He's spending £950. Well, what's he going to do? Well, then he has to raise the price of the bread, the milk, uh, the biscuits, the chocolate, etc., that he's selling. That
Is
impacts
that
those on the
just
ground.
as a
Mm,
pause? Is that actually how it happens? If you
yeah,
own a shop and your expenses go up, your living expenses, um, does that lead you to put the prices up of your goods, or
Eventually, you will, because the problem.
are you not always wanting to maximize your income, which would like can't you just don't you want to set the prices at the point where you will make the most profit regardless of your circumstances? And obviously, if you raise prices, you risk selling fewer goods. So,
Sure.
what like if you own the corner store and you're absolutely fine and you don't need more income, you're probably still going to want to make the maximum profit. So, wouldn't you
Mm.
still pick the optimal price for goods?
Yeah, I mean, it isn't a linear sort of thing, is it? I mean, how capital works and functions is actually quite complex, but we don't know because everyone has different profit margins and whatnot, and everyone is sort of working at a different scale of things. But people will, if they find they might not be making a tremendous amount of profit as it is, or it might be, it's variable, and there are lots of variables sort of at work. So when they see their running costs increase at some point, unless they're in a, let's just say broadly speaking, they're in a healthy position as regards to their incomings, their outgoings, their profit margin, their running costs. Unless they're in a good position in that respect, then things are going to have to increase or whatnot. It's difficult, but it's a knock-on effect. That's the problem with inflation. It's sort of a domino effect. When prices go up
Yeah,
across
I
the
would.
board, then local providers, they have to sort of, if the cost of each unit of lamb, chicken, and beef is increasing, then I'm being a bit facetious here, maybe a bit silly, but say your kebab provider, they're going to have to increase the cost of their food and their products because everything around them is going up. The
Yeah.
containers they buy, the ingredients for the salad, the sauces, so on and so forth. It's difficult. It's a very complex sort of ecosystem. But ideally, what you said is the ideal circumstances. People can absorb a certain amount of inflation or rising costs, but the problem is it's sort of out of control, really, isn't it? It's going up, it's going down. There's push and pull factors beyond our control, whether it's Russia, Ukraine, rising commodity prices, whatever the Fed's doing, and all of this is part of the same kind of cycle. But I think what I would say is, coming back to our original concept, when it's beyond your control, then so are a lot of the results, and that includes inequality. And that's sort of brings us back to the start, really. So
Great. Let's. We've gone over double the time on that round. I'm going to
wow.
give you a 9.
Thank you.
Well, nine is an excellent first score. Not actually out of 10. It's out of. It's kind of a random cap,
Okay.
but consider that probably the average score for round one is like 8.5, 8 probably. So
Oh, right. Okay.
you're kicking off above average, but you've got to chase. If you're gonna, you can't let up your guard too much.
Yeah. Okay.
I've had some very excellent guests on, so this is a tough game show.
Sure.
Ethics, history, or metaphysics?
Right. Ethics, history, or metaphysics. Let's go for. I think metaphysics will probably catch me out. Let's go for.
I accidentally pressed metaphysics, but I can reverse it.
Yes, please reverse. Yeah.
Give me a second. So, what were the other options?
Okay, let's go for metaphysics. Go on then. Okay, these are
you
pretty.
want to?
Yeah, I'll take advantage of these. Okay, so there is no shared identity of a person over time.
Mm-hmm.
Identity of a person. Objects are merely a language game. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. Hmm. They're all very good, actually. Objects. What do you
Good.
mean? Objects are merely a language game. What does that? That's a
Yeah,
bit.
well, in some ways, this is an idea that I have. I'm sure in philosophy, other people have coined the same thought, but just in discussions with people. Um, what I mean by that is, like, for example, this phone,
Mhm.
we encapsulate it with the word phone and say all of the parts that are attached to each other that move as a single object comprise an object. So in human language, it's useful for us to refer to a thing like a phone, but I don't feel that that word, that pointer to this object, is pointing to something with this kind of platonic or
Sure.
idealized metaphysical thing. Like what actually exists, this is what I'm proposing with this assertion, objects are merely a language game, is that this is really just a large collection of atoms that are bonded to one another. And if you analyzed it closely enough, there's probably like millions of atoms that are falling off or attaching
I
to
see
it.
what you mean. Yeah.
You
Okay.
know,
Yeah. That's.
this is a complex interaction of physics that, from our macro human scale, we have a conceptualization of it as a single
Yeah.
object, but
Mm.
it's only because of our it's the human categorization that makes this a unity rather than um, I think without human eyes on it, then the unit in a way is the would be the atom or even the subatomic particle.
Hmm. I'm leaning towards one. There is no shared identity of a person over time. Let's do one. And two and
Great.
three are also quite interesting as well. We can only do one, right?
Yes, you can only do
Okay,
one.
let's do. Okay, let's do. There is no shared identity of a person over time. Hmm. This is very interesting because I've had this sort of similar concepts and ideas kind of bouncing around in my head for a long time now. Um, I think it's difficult because identity is not fixed, in my opinion. I think identity is something that is by nature, it's very transient. Um, it does tend to, change. Um, it's a fluid thing. It's a very fluid and transient thing. Whether people all like it or not, it's also quite a very personal thing as well. I don't think there's one thing that determines someone's identity. Um, I think it's yeah. I don't. I think there are lots of things that influence who you are and the person you are, and I think it's very difficult when you start setting hard limits to identity. Um, I think it's. I think that's quite problematic. But we do live in an age where people are kind of very atomized and very confused about this topic, really. And I think if there was a deeper shared sense of identity, um, yeah, there would be less dysphoria, less confusion over this. But I think, sort of, we live in a very to go back to your maybe your Adam Curtis sort of thing you had with AA, we live in a complex world, don't we? Um,
Mm.
Fewer and fewer things are fixed. They're not what we maybe first thought they might be. A bit like, as Curtis sort of illustrates. So yes, I think it's always going to be very subjective. I think identity is a very sort of subjective thing. I don't know. What do you think of that?
Yeah, so I guess to boil the question down, if you're, I don't know, a 70-year-old
Sure.
and you think about yourself at 10 years old, are you the same person? Because in many ways, those two people, if they were to meet through some kind of time machine, would not
Sure.
have a great deal in common, right?
They wouldn't.
one of
No.
them, one of them has vastly different life experiences and has gone through life and probably changed their personality and their opinions substantially. Never mind that their immediate context would be, one of them has an awareness of new technologies or events in world history that have happened over their
Mm.
lifetime. Um,
Yeah.
However, on the other hand, there's a thread of similarity, I think, with most people that you can you can get to know the personality of a baby within the first few weeks of its life, and then if you were to meet them at 20, you'd actually recognize probably some curious intangible threads of similarity that maybe that is the unchangeable, immutable identity of that person.
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard to definitively say that your identity is fixed in, one point in time or attached to one thing, um, sort of irrevocably. I mean, people's social, material, environmental conditions are often, they are also changing all the time. And I think that impacts, the person who we are. Um, and your example is very, very good. If we go back, maybe because we're a bit younger, it's a bit different. If
Yeah,
you
neither
go
of
back,
us are 70.
exactly, yeah, 5 years or 10 years, you'll find that you know, we were different, or we did have um,
Different
different points of
opinions, different
view.
abilities. Yeah.
You have new experiences which sort of
Form
shape
you.
your outlook and impact who you are, and thus your identity, um, sometimes in fairly strong ways. Now, I think that, to sort of say this, is there a sort of core that kind of remains regardless? Do you know what I mean? Is there a certain center that is kind of fixed, maybe at a young age, that will always be with you? I think there is, actually. Yeah, I think, you know, um, I think everybody has that as well. There are some things about you that possibly, possibly won't change, um, and whatnot. But some people can have one thing that they're attached to that really does impact who they are, their identity. It could be religion and faith. It could be ethnos. It can be family. You meet people who are very attached to their family and their roots. You meet people who are, devoutly religious. Um, and I admire them. Yeah, I admire their faith, their commitment, their dedication. Um, and I think, strong identities come from having something that's bigger than the individual, than the self, to aspire to. Um, so whether that's, the nation, your family, your faith, your community, or something like that, it requires a selflessness, a kind of sacrifice, deferring pleasure, contributing to something that's bigger than just you, than the individual. And that's the interesting paradox of identity. It actually isn't just the individual, because, there are many things that contribute to the self, to the individual. You can't just focus on, pleasure, gratification. I don't think you can just focus on the material either. The material world, I think there's identity is complex because we're complex. To be honest, I think human beings are
Well, right.
complex.
Let's bring the round to an end because after all, we need to catch up time. But
Yeah,
because you,
35.
well, I thought you did a great job, and also because you picked the category, you accepted the category that you were dealt, as it were, even
Mm,
though it wasn't your first choice. So I give you credit for both of those things, and you get
thank you, sir.
10. So
Okay,
you're
that's good.
steaming ahead.
Mm.
Cinema and theatre, world affairs, or epistemology.
Yeah, I think the last one I did challenge myself because I really was going to go for history actually, but I think it's good.
Maybe
I
next
don't want to
year.
play it. I don't want to play it safe in every round, and we've got listeners as well, so we should. Now I do focus on world affairs a lot. Um, Epistemology. Okay, why don't let's do cinema and theatre because I'm kind of closely sort of I'm increasingly sort of moving into this area a bit more, even though
All
it's not
right.
my niche. It's not,
This
it's not.
this can be part of your transition.
Yes.
Adaptations, sequels, and remakes stifle originality. Cinema and theatre perpetuate harmful stereotypes, or casting should reflect demographic realities.
Okay, good. Yeah. So, um, thinking of one or two.
Okay.
I'm thinking cinema and theatre perpetuate stereotypes. Yeah, let's do one. Adaptations, sequels, and remakes stifle originality.
And are you arguing in favour of this or against it?
I would argue in favour of this. Yes.
Go ahead.
Yes. Yes. So I've got a big article on culture coming up actually. So look out for that. And I deal with this problem in the article.
Do you want
I think
to remind my listeners where they can find these articles?
sure. Yeah. It will be over at my Substack. Which I guess I'll put the link in the description a little later. Luke, maybe you could attach it to the stream. Would be good.
Yes,
So
because
yeah,
this is
okay,
pre-recorded. Hopefully, that's already in the description.
okay, yeah. So
Through
can
the
we?
magic of time travel.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, we can go off script a bit. Yes, I think this is true. I mean, I just think that look, I again, cinema and even popular culture probably isn't my uh, niche, my number one topic, but I think you know zooming out a bit, I often find myself asking just what has happened to culture, what has happened to the quality of cinema and television. I mean, it seems to me to have, declined drastically. There's a meme that goes around in these circles that, culture kind of ended in the year 2000 kind of thing. And that's pretty popular, and I think it says a lot about where we are. That we are so reliant on sequels and prequels and reboots as well. And but I wonder how much of this is to do with our current predicament, and how much of this is just the culture industry. Um,
You're sort of saying it's the other way around. Not that the adaptations and the sequels and the remakes stifle originality, but the lack of originality results in adaptations, sequels, and remakes.
Yes, yeah, it is. I mean, I go back to Adorno's, the culture industry, and even though it was written some time ago, I think he sort of touches on a lot of the key points in this respect. I mean, I think it's funny how we don't really have heroes anymore as well. I think everything is we've got, how would I say, it just seems that modernity cannot produce these lasting, enduring cultural icons. Instead, you have like an old Tom Cruise or a senior Johnny Depp, and their careers are kind of prolonged by Photoshop, filters, airbrushing, photography, and increasingly AI, isn't it? It's this weird sort of thing. But the whole to the point you said, I mean, yes, sequels and reboots, they do stifle originality in many respects. But yeah, I think it's funny because people want to sort of invest in something that was successful before, update it for the present, the current times, the present times, and whatnot, and sort of think that that's a winning formula. But I think it's more. I think it's also about. There's so much within this. It's not. It's also about the themes, the ideas. Increasingly, when I see new movies, the dialogue just isn't. It's not realistic. It's not how people talk, really. It's how people talk to the camera, which is a kind of a self-referential point. Of course, you're watching a movie, but it is true. Characters aren't relatable, and I think these are all problems. CGI is a problem. Going back to point 3 there, all this, reflecting the realities of demographic realities. I think that's problematic. I don't think that's easy either. So in some ways, building a coherent narrative, a film that's going to appeal to many people is challenging. Maybe we're not giving them enough credit, but yeah, I mean, and all they're doing.
I mean, I'm in the middle of producing for the culmination of Lambster. I've got my audio play under production, and certainly I'm kind of becoming aware of the gargantuan challenge it is to bring together a multimedia project that has lots of technical considerations, but ideally and fundamentally, all of those should become invisible to the audience and serve a story. So this is indeed a high bar to make something, even to make a modern sequel blockbuster, or a remake, or an adaptation of something that already exists. It's not. It doesn't happen by accident. There's a lot of very talented and creative people who are involved in such projects. In fact, it was thinking about movies that was one of the first times I really questioned the concept, that because I was very much in the view that the best things in life were the emergent result of a crowd who each were kind of contributing their small the small amount of work onto the pile, and that you could achieve anything through this almost like an ant colony where everybody's following their own small local objectives, but that the total sum would be this magnificent triumph, in this case of an artistic achievement. And just became increasingly clear that the way that movies are made affects the result, and you can't produce a powerful vision from a committee process. Yeah, so it's interesting that the decisions and the approach taken at the very top can be the make or break factor, even if all the poor artists working underneath the director are doing a great job. If the director is not firing on all cylinders, then it's kind of futile.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think being a bit more blunt, I mean, it just seems to me that with all these remakes and adaptations, they're just killing a lot of our heroes from before. Really, that's all they're doing. I mean, they're the Star Wars
deliberately
franchise.
mendacious.
Yeah, the Indiana Jones. They're just, it's kind of like a ritualistic sort of humiliation as they sort of bring these characters into sort of where we are now today in the 21st century, and they superimpose a lot of sort of progressive and woke themes, ideas, and points of view, and it's just all they're doing. It seems like it just kind of seems like they're humiliating our generation, really. I mean, certainly if you're a mid to early millennial, I mean, they defile, like they diversify, and they humiliate. So Indiana Jones, James Bond, Luke Skywalker, that movie, Han Solo again from Star Wars, the Ghostbusters, and there's a lot more as well. They just mock them, they just humiliate them, and it's kind of like they're laughing at us in a way. And that's one thing I don't like. I mean, I don't really watch these modern movies. I just, if it's an Alfred Hitchcock film, a Kubrick, I'm quite big on Stanley Kubrick. I got his the Stanley Kubrick archives just over Christmas, actually, and that's a very good tabletop book. It's just, I think culture is just different, and we're just different, and that that you see that reflected in the cultural output. I mean, culture used to be, Luke, it used to be subversive, used to speak truth to power, but now increasingly, as you just referenced, everything is backed by huge, powerful, global, multinational organizations, and it's and I think you see that reflected everywhere. I mean, a lot of people. I mean, now I think if you look at things now, people are the actors, the actresses, the musical artists. They're more likely to be sat next to an executive from Goldman Sachs or JP Morgan as opposed to challenging them in the public sphere. Do you know what I mean? It's and I think that's
right. I'm going to give you 9.
Okay,
we've only got 10 minutes left, and we've got 3 more rounds to do.
Really? We need an extension.
Pick up the pace. Psychology, elite theory, or theology?
Okay, let's make it quick. Let's go for elite theory.
A global elite shapes world affairs. The education system is designed to reproduce elite dominance, or meritocracy is a myth?
I think 3 is a given, to be honest. I'll go for number 1. A global elite shapes world affairs.
All right, take it away.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think this sort of speaks to the first one as well, where people talk about the free market, and we can all engage in the free market and meritocracy, and if you work hard, if you pull yourself up by the bootstraps. But I think the reality is a lot different. I think probably a lot of people in these circles would concur and say that a lot of those are, false truths that are given to us by, various media outlets, and they push these narratives. But the reality is that, as always, it's a pyramid, and at the top sits a precious few individuals, and that's the reality of the world. I would say things are probably slightly more decentralized, really, if you think about the sort of the idea of the Yarvin idea of the cathedral, or AA's kind of octopus. I think we have lots of sub elites, whether it's in industry, banking, big tech, advertising, I think is one, but also to a lesser extent, probably entertainment, and whatnot. But of course, we have multilateral. We have this huge sort of infrastructure of multilateral organizations which govern a lot that takes place around us. So we saw that during COVID with the World Health Organization giving directives to world governments, how to manage the pandemic, vaccines and masks and whatnot. There's so many. I mean, we've spoken about them before, Luke. The World Bank, the International Monetary Fund, the UN, NATO to some degree. Some are military alliances, some are financial ones, some are political. The World Trade Organization, you could say co-ops trade for those who are at the top of the chain, and that's the reality of that's really the
All
reality
right.
of the world we're in.
Well,
Yeah.
I'm gonna give you 10, which is the quickest 10 ever achieved. But
Wow.
I think you came in, you made your point very effectively, very
I mean,
succinctly.
we could probably do a whole stream in each and every one of these propositions. It's that kind of
Definitely. This is
thing.
the strange readjustment we have to make for this game because we're
Yeah.
kind of used to pick a topic and talk for 2.5 hours on it. And in this case, we've got to do 6 topics in an hour, so
Mm.
it's pretty intense. Technology, natural sciences, or Christology?
Gonna have to be a bit honest here. I don't even know what the third one is. Is that to do with Christ?
Yes,
Oh,
it's
it is.
the
Okay, that's about.
study of
We'll have
Jesus'
to go with
teachings.
technology. Yeah, technology.
AI poses a greater threat than nuclear weapons. Blockchain technology is important, or automation will have a net positive impact.
Um, yeah, that's a tough one. What is? I'm thinking of one. Should we do
Yeah.
one?
The hot
Or should we
button issue at the
do?
moment, AI.
Okay, let's do blockchain. Yeah, because that's a bit more financy. Yeah. So,
Let's
okay, go
talk
on.
about Bitcoin.
Hmm. I often, a lot of my work I've done on political economy, the dollar, invariably at some point people will mention Bitcoin, and a lot of people sort of come to Bitcoin because they are very suspect of the status quo, floating fiat currencies, the central banking complex, and so on and so forth. Whether Bitcoin is the answer, I'm not sure. I mean, my good friend Dan from the Lotus Eaters, Dan Tubbers, he says it's okay when you're doing smaller transactions, but the problem is on a mass scale, on a large scale, it's very hard to sort of implement really any kind of blockchain backed technology or Bitcoin or whatever. I think it is promising. It's hard. It's probably about as close as we've come to some sort of parallel um, monetary system as I can remember in the sort of, if you like, the post Bretton Woods era. I don't think there's any doubt about that. But I think it's always going to be stifled by the elites. They have and they will continue to put up barriers. I don't actually own any Bitcoin. Um, I'm still a bit suspect. I always find with these things, there's a lot more questions than answers. Do you know? Do you know what I mean? I'm not sure what you
Yeah,
think about that, but
I'm pretty dismissive of Bitcoin these days and cryptocurrencies in general, and wider uses of blockchain as well. So yeah, I'm fairly
mm,
I'm fairly firmly in the on the side of the argument here that blockchain technology is not important.
yeah,
I can see the reason that people would desire a decentralized currency.
mm,
Um, However, I think it is a delusion to think that a technology can um, overcome the raw reality of human civilization, that is power relationships. And
absolutely, yeah, power based,
basically,
yeah,
if you're living in a country and they're going to tax you in a fiat currency, then the fact that you're using blockchain on the side doesn't remove your
Obligations to the
your sort of
system.
financial vulnerability, which was the whole
No, it
point in
doesn't.
the first place.
You're
So it's
always
kind of, I can kind of, it's got some value, but the grand goal of the world moving away from centralized currencies. Now, what probably will happen is that each country that wants to run a currency could set up a centrally managed blockchain, but then that also is completely pointless because you may as well just run a traditional financial system if you're going to centralize things.
exactly. Well, the problem is that there will always be these issues of accountability, centralization. At some point, you're going to have to, incorporate these into your system, and everything is so globalized and integrated now. It's, you've got to think across borders, because otherwise, as you said a minute or two ago, you're always going to be predisposed to the status quo in the existing system. You're always going to have those obligations just because, as you say, you've got a bit of Bitcoin or even a bit of gold or whatever, a small asset portfolio. That doesn't mean that you can, wall yourself off from the system. But I don't know how you do it really. Do you go and live in the woods or something and completely disconnect? But yeah, that's it's a
All
good.
right, I'm gonna give you 9 for that round, and that
No
brings us to
problem.
our final round: literature, software and mathematics, or eschatology.
Come on. What is eschatology? Come on, I've never heard either of those
So,
syllables. Even
have you not? It's about the end times. It's about
right.
well,
It's a bit
usually the context I hear it in is about various different Christian views about what's going to happen at the
You
end of
know
the
what? I
world.
will go for. I will play it safe, and I will go for. Oh, sweet. No. Okay, let's go for literature. Yeah, I want to play it safe.
The distinction between high and low genre fiction is arbitrary. Fictional narratives have great power, or censorship of literature is dangerous.
Yeah, let's go. Okay, let's go for the lower. Hang on a second. Hang on a second. Fiction. This is the last one, isn't it? How long do we have, Luke? Is it just a few minutes?
Well, yeah, I'm prepared to run over fractionally, but
Okay.
yeah, we're hitting the hour in 2.5 minutes. So
Yeah, we are. You can see the timer. Yeah. Let's do. Yeah, let's do censorship of literature is dangerous. Yeah, I would have picked that one anyway. Yeah. Yeah, this is a big. Yeah, this is increasingly a very important topic that keeps coming up. I mean, I remember last year with the whole Roald Dahl thing, and they're sort of changing words and expressions and pronouns and whatnot, and it's very disconcerting because they'll start with the small things and then they'll progressively, you know, start making more and more changes and edits, and it's a slippery slope. Again, isn't it? I think this also comes back to the question we did on the um, film and whatnot, where they end up sort of rebooting the franchise. And I think for literature, it's very difficult. I mean, what do you do? Are they going to just erase all the literature before a certain time? Are they going to make wholesale changes? Are they going to rewrite them? I mean, all of these ideas are very Orwellian, very Huxleyan in their, however you look at them. But increasingly, of course, fewer and fewer people read. Even fewer people read the classics. I would say, the amount of people that are actually well grounded in, classic English literature, whether it's poetry, the novel, whether it's dramas. I think it's a shrinking number, isn't it? I think we have to preserve these things. If they want to do their own, if they want to censor and they want to remake, why don't they do their own books, their own movies and whatnot? It's a recurring theme. Have your ideas. It doesn't matter if I think they're bogus or whatever, but don't touch what we feel is sacred and what we treasure and what has played a formative part in our identity and our culture and whatnot. And that's funny. It goes back to one of the first questions. Why are we atomized? Why are people confused about who they are? Because everything around them is changing for this modern world, and it's very little of it is actually good. So yeah, against censorship of literature, obviously, I think people should have access to all the literature that's available, really, and it's not encouraging, and it's fills us with worry, I think, doesn't it? And justifiably so. What do you think?
Well, yes, I was just thinking about whether, if I was the king, I would censor things myself, because it's kind of easy to complain about things being censored that you don't like, that you
Sure.
think shouldn't be censored, or the hypothetical of something important being censored. Obviously my brain immediately goes to, well, are they going to censor the Bible? That does not seem impossible. But then that's different from saying that there isn't a right place for censorship. And would I, if I had the power, would I censor certain things? And I guess by censor, I really mean make it illegal to access without the proper authorization. And I could see myself. I don't have a particular scenario in mind, but I could see myself deciding that was a good thing to do in a certain circumstance. What do you think?
Yeah, I think what's interesting is that now the regime has pretty much co-opted all the channels of media, information, entertainment anyway. So it's not like, when Stalin was rounding up intellectuals and academics, or the Chinese Revolution and Cultural Revolution, where they, were burning, anything that was seen as subversive and whatnot. They don't really need to do that now, because they basically have their hands on all the levers of information and media and whatnot. But yeah, when you look at it from the vantage point of the king, I mean, I guess you are going to remove anything that stands in opposition to your rule, or that runs contrary to your agenda or your ideology. I mean, that's just happened. I just gave two examples from history, I guess. But increasingly, I mean, all the avenues of knowledge, media, information, communication are an extension of the elite's power. They don't speak, they don't sort of question power. They don't speak truth to power anymore. They reinforce power. They reinforce the elites. And, I think that's apparent to anyone. I think increasingly. So they don't even let you put up stickers about immigration in the UK anymore. They don't let you pray outside of abortion clinics. So who are we? The false gods of democracy and free speech and whatnot. People don't say this is a free country anymore. You don't hear this anymore. You don't hear people really even. You hear people sort of defend free speech, but they're always from a certain, generation, and it's the same figures. I think the masses want conformity. I think they want to see themselves and their values reflected back at them. To be honest with you, they don't like competing narratives and whatnot, and so censorship and erasure is a big tool in their arsenal. And I think our work is never done, because you're right, they could come after the Bible. It starts with Roald Dahl and starts with comic books and whatnot, and before you know it, they're at the gates of the church, and well, we don't like this passage, we don't like this psalm, we don't like, and that's where we're headed.
With that rousing defense of literature that should not be censored,
Hmm.
I'm going to give you a score of 10 for final round.
Okay. Thank you. Yeah.
And that only brings us to seeing your total score. So let me bring up the high score table and refresh it because my code doesn't. There you are. You are tied with Frody, ahead of
Okay.
Pharaoh and Nathan Hood, just behind Apostolic Majesty.
Well, there's some big names in the broader movement there, so I'm in good company.
Very
Can
good
you
company there.
scroll up a bit? Who's at the
Morgoth is in the lead with a
Morgoth?
stonking 67. His
Semi-god.
sheer poetic voice took him above and beyond. Likewise, Semiagog. I think it's just a certain kind of charming, like tale telling that the sort of the flair that brings them above and beyond. Black
Yeah,
Horse is
sure.
kind of
Absolutely.
in
He's done well.
in
Yeah,
your
60.
mold, and
Yeah.
he did extremely well. So
He did, yeah, that's good. I'll look out for them. It's good for you because you can take these propositions and you can use them on your Friday streams or for the future, really. You can call people back and, maybe go into depth in a couple of them or, so that's also.
Yeah, it is a bit of a shame to have to cut so many excellent conversations so short. But then on the other hand, we've done nothing but have we've had like 4-hour streams for the last 10 years. So maybe there's space for something a little bit more light,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. No, you're right. Yeah, that's it's quite good. It's something new. It's quite different. I've enjoyed it actually. I was a bit kind of not nervous, but it
Well, a
depends
lot of
what to
people didn't know
expect.
what to expect, but I feel like for this year, there's no way to get around that, right? You can next year you'll know what to expect, but this year it's hard to describe in text, like a giant paragraph explaining the thing is.
Yeah,
I think it's easier
absolutely.
just to throw people into it. Good. Well, thank you for joining me, and
It's good.
everyone go and
Thanks for having
subscribe
me
to
on.
Nomad Substack.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thanks a lot, Luke. I'll watch the episodes as they come in and appreciate it. Yeah.
Bye.